riding with somebody else. And it's not uncommon to hear, but it's not like my buddy asked him one time. My buddy asked Nolan multiple times to get on the boat. Nolan, get on the boat, we're leaving. If you're coming, you got to come now. And Nolan made a decision to stay out on the island. And like he said,
how many people heard that?
At least five. Everyone that was on our boat right there, because the Palm Beach had already left. My buddy went ahead and went home on the Palm Beach, and three guys on the way back. And Nolan wasn't the only person to ride out there with us and in with somebody else. We had multiple people in our group that rode out with us and rode in on someone else's boat. And that, like I said, that's not an uncommon thing to do. A lot of people do that. I could name probably 50 people out
This video covers an active investigation. All information comes from public reporting. No suspects have been named and no charges have been filed. 11:14 in the morning. That's the moment the boat carrying Nolan Wells and his friends reaches Horn Island on the 4th of July. Then, according to the GPS data pulled from that vessel, it simply stops moving. Not for a few minutes, not for an hour. From 11:14 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon, the boat sits stationary. Over 5 hours in one place, on a remote barrier island 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. At 4:31, the GPS shows the boat finally moving again. But it isn't racing home, it's crawling, under 4.5 knots for nearly 3 miles, as if something is wrong with it, or as if no one on board is in any hurry. Nolan Wells is not on it. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today, and let's get into what's happened since. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a wide receiver for Southwest Mississippi Community College, home for the summer, celebrating Independence Day the way he had many times before. A boat trip out to Horn Island with people he'd known since high school. Horn Island isn't a resort. It's a federally protected barrier island, undeveloped, reachable only by boat, known for its untouched beaches and its isolation. Locals go there precisely because there's nothing there. No docks lined with restaurants, no cell towers, just sand and water and whoever you brought with you. Nolan had made that same trip more times than his family could count. It wasn't reckless, it was routine. This time, the routine broke. He never came back. His friends did, and when they returned to the mainland that evening, they brought his phone with them. They did not bring Nolan. According to what they told investigators, their boat began taking on water sometime that afternoon, forcing the group to head back to shore without him. They say Nolan chose to stay behind. One friend, Warren Hudson, has been the most vocal about what he says happened in those final hours. He says he saw Nolan on the island around 3 in the afternoon, in conversation with a young woman, and that Nolan was asked more than once to get back in the boat and simply declined. Hudson has said this wasn't unusual, that groups splitting up on the island and finding separate rides home happens often. He has also said that when Nolan's phone was later requested by a friend's family, it was handed over without any resistance. Hudson's mother is a sitting judge in Jackson County. That fact has become part of the public conversation around the case, even though she has not been accused of anything and has said her family will cooperate fully with investigators and with Nolan's parents. The young woman Nolan was reportedly speaking with has since been identified in multiple reports as 19-year-old Katie McCormack, a fellow Ocean Springs native. She has not spoken publicly, but her sister has. According to her sister, Katie never understood herself to be the reason Nolan stayed. She says Katie believed Nolan was getting back on the boat with the friends who brought him, that she had no idea he was being left on the island at all. That account directly conflicts with what Nolan's friends have said. According to her sister, Katie was on the island that day with an entirely different group of friends and later left with her brother and his fiancée, a detail that, if accurate, complicates the idea that she and Nolan were together for any extended stretch of time. Katie herself has not addressed any of this publicly. Her family, through her sister, has said they've cooperated fully with both investigators and with Nolan's parents, and that no one has accused Katie of any wrongdoing. Still, Nolan's family's attorney has pointed to the conflict between these two versions directly, asking publicly which one is true. The one where Nolan chose to stay specifically to be with her, or the one where she assumed all along that he was leaving with everyone else and had no idea he'd been left behind. Those two accounts cannot both be fully accurate, and nobody with the ability to reconcile them has done so publicly. 2 days later, on July 6th, a park ranger found a body on the island's northwest shoreline. It was Nolan. Authorities have said they suspect drowning, but the official cause and manner of death have still not been released. The state autopsy and toxicology results exist. They have been completed. But the Jackson County District Attorney has said they will not be made public until the case is presented to a grand jury. That is standard procedure in the county for any death that isn't from natural causes or a non-criminal accident, but for a family desperate for answers, standard procedure has felt like a wall. So Nolan's mother, Christine Wells Wansley, started looking for answers on her own. When she finally received her son's phone, days after he went missing, she says she noticed something troubling. Texts and Snapchat messages appeared to be missing, deleted in her account of it, though the chain of custody for that phone between July 4th and when it reached her remains unclear. She didn't stop there. Christine had access to Life 360, a location tracking app built for exactly this, families keeping loose tabs on each other's whereabouts, and she had been using it to follow Nolan's phone in real time as the search unfolded. Once she had the device in hand, she went back and compared that Life 360 location history against Snapchat's own separate location data for the same account for the same stretch of hours. The two didn't match. That discrepancy has not been publicly explained. It is not evidence of any specific wrongdoing on its own. Location data can behave strangely for a dozen mundane reasons, but for a mother who already suspects she isn't getting the full picture, it was enough to escalate. On July 28th, attorneys representing Nolan's mother filed subpoenas in Jackson County Chancery Court. The target's Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, Snapchat, TikTok, and Life 360 itself. The subpoenas are sweeping. They demand IP addresses tied to logins and password resets, account creation dates, every username the account has ever used, two-factor authentication activity, full message content, photos, videos, stories, and direct messages. Anyone who exchanged messages with Nolan's accounts, GPS data and timestamps tied to the account's activity. Every company named has 21 days to respond. This didn't come out of nowhere. On the day of Nolan's funeral, attorneys had already sent a separate wave of letters, 10 pages long, broken into nearly 20 categories of evidence, to his friends, their families, local law enforcement, prosecutors, and the medical examiner's office. Those letters put everyone on formal notice that a lawsuit is anticipated, and they came with an unusually specific instruction: preserve everything. Phones, laptops, social media accounts, group chats, emails, boat maintenance records, fuel receipts, and critically, disable any automatic deletion or auto-overwrite functions on those devices, effective immediately, so nothing generated after that date can be lost to a routine setting on someone's phone. In other words, nothing gets to quietly disappear. Not anymore. One friend has pushed back hard on the implication behind all of this. Warren Hudson has publicly and repeatedly denied that anyone touched or deleted anything on Nolan's phone. He says multiple people left their phones behind on the boat that day, that phones were simply gathered up and moved from the boat to a truck as a group, and that Nolan's phone was surrendered the moment it was asked for, with no hesitation and no argument. Separate from the digital trail, there's the question of what happened on the island itself in those final hours, and specifically, how much Nolan had been drinking. A preliminary internal document from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, sent out on July 5th as search crews combed the island, stated that witnesses told investigators Nolan had been drinking heavily. It's worth being precise about what that is and isn't. This is one internal email written the day after Nolan went missing, based on second-hand accounts collected in the chaos of an active search. It is not a toxicology report. The official toxicology results exist, but as we've said, they haven't been released. Separately, in a podcast interview, Warren Hudson himself acknowledged that the group had been drinking that day on the boat. So on this point, at least, there's some agreement that alcohol was involved. What remains genuinely unverified is the word heavily, and what role, if any, it played in what happened next. It matters why this distinction gets made so carefully. If toxicology eventually shows a high blood alcohol level, that could reshape how people understand nearly everything else in this case. His judgment in the water, his decision or non-decision to stay behind, even how his friends behaved around him that afternoon. But if it doesn't, then a single internal email written the day after a search began, based on accounts collected from people who were themselves at that party, shouldn't be allowed to define the story before the science does. That's the entire reason this gets flagged as an allegation and not a fact. Not because it's necessarily wrong, but because no one outside that Marine Resources email and Hudson's own comments has confirmed it, and the one document that could confirm or deny it with certainty is still sealed. There's also been a piece of viral audio worth addressing directly because it's spread fast and it deserves a clear answer. When the friends' boat began taking on water, they called a private towing service for help, and that call was recorded. An enhanced version of that recording circulated online, with some listeners claiming they could make out disturbing phrases, someone asking if a person was dead, someone being told to wake up. A digital forensics expert who reviewed both the original recording and the enhanced version has said his team's own transcription found none of those phrases in either version, and noted that the enhanced copy actually ran 20 seconds longer than the original, raising real questions about what exactly had been added to it. That specific claim has been disputed and, based on the available review, does not hold up. What does hold up and what remains genuinely unresolved is what the body itself could tell investigators, and what it couldn't. Nolan's family commissioned their own independent autopsy, conducted separately from the state's official exam. The pathologist who performed it, Dr. Roger Mitchell, a former chief medical examiner, released his findings in July. He found no fractures, no deep tissue injuries anywhere he was able to examine. The face, the back, the ribs, the pelvis, the arms and legs. That's worth sitting with for a moment because it's often overlooked in the coverage. A fairly thorough physical examination turned up no obvious signs of a violent assault. But there were two significant limitations. First, during a detailed dissection of the back of the head, Mitchell found a patch of unexplained discoloration in the soft tissue overlying the skull. There was no break in the skin above it and no fracture underneath it. Because of how much the body had decomposed by the time of this second examination, Mitchell could not determine what caused that discoloration or when it happened. He flagged it as inconclusive and recommended further examination, not as evidence of an injury, but as a finding that simply can't be explained away yet either. Second, and more significant, when Nolan's body arrived for this second autopsy, several internal neck structures were missing: the trachea, the hyoid bone, cartilage from the larynx and thyroid area. These were retained by whoever performed the first official autopsy. A practice Mitchell says isn't unusual if the original examiner had any concern about a neck injury, though no one has said publicly why they were held back in this case. Without those structures, Mitchell could not fully evaluate the neck for any sign of compression, fracture, or strangulation. In his own words, that meant he could not rule out injury to the neck as a contributing factor, or even as a cause of death. To be clear about what that sentence means and what it doesn't. It does not mean there is evidence of foul play. It means the examination that could have ruled foul play out definitively simply wasn't possible with what he was given. Cause and manner of death in his report are listed as undetermined, pending further investigation. Outside forensic experts who reviewed the situation but who weren't involved in either autopsy have pointed out that second examinations like this one carry an inherent disadvantage. By the time Mitchell received the body, it had already been through one full autopsy. Decomposition had progressed further, and organs that had been removed, examined, and returned to the body cavity during the first exam made it harder to assess certain kinds of injury. Bruising in particular can become difficult or impossible to detect on skin that has already begun to decompose. That's part of why Mitchell's report reads the way it does. Not as a dead end, but as a list of everything the state's official exam is now positioned to answer because it had the body first, and because it will have full toxicology results the independent exam never had access to. The official state autopsy may be able to answer what the independent one couldn't. It would have had access to those retained structures, full toxicology, and the complete investigative file. But as we've covered, that report is being held until it reaches a grand jury. The investigation itself has grown well beyond the shoreline of Horn Island. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office is leading, with assistance from the FBI. Assistance that isn't unusual here, since Horn Island itself is federal land. But the FBI's role has expanded into something else entirely. Investigating threats. Real, credible threats made against witnesses, against Nolan's friends, and against public officials connected to the case. Mississippi's Attorney General has publicly warned that anyone who tries to intimidate investigators, witnesses, or officials in this case is committing a felony and will be held accountable. More than 60 witnesses have now been interviewed. The three friends who were on the boat with Nolan have all been formally interviewed by investigators. And Nolan's phone. the one left behind, the one his mother says had messages missing from it, is set to undergo a joint inspection, with digital forensics experts working for both the family and the sheriff's office examining it together. The case has also become politically charged in a way that's worth acknowledging plainly. Mississippi's governor has publicly blamed the family's attorneys for stoking the threats that followed, saying they were dividing the public for their own benefit. The state's public safety commissioner has said the same investigators are being pushed to move faster than a thorough process allows, while insisting that local law enforcement, not his department, is running point on the case itself. And Mississippi's Attorney General has said her office will hold accountable anyone who crosses the line from criticism into intimidation, regardless of which side of this case they're on. None of that changes what investigators still don't know. It just shows how much attention is now fixed on this small stretch of coastline. The Jackson County District Attorney has said plainly what happens next. Every death in the county that isn't from natural causes or a routine accident goes before a grand jury. This case will be no different. Once the investigation is complete, everything, the state autopsy, the toxicology, the witness statements, whatever the subpoena data eventually shows, goes to that grand jury for review. There's no public timeline for when that happens. Jackson County doesn't publish its grand jury schedule, unlike some of its neighboring counties. The subpoenas issued this week have a 21-day clock attached to them. The spoliation letters are already out, and every recipient is now legally obligated to preserve whatever they have, rather than let it quietly vanish. The digital forensics review of Nolan's phone is coming, with experts for both sides in the room at once. And somewhere in the middle of all of it is a state autopsy report that already exists, that already has answers written into it, sealed until the moment prosecutors decide a grand jury. And only after that, the public is allowed to see it. And the Jackson County District Attorney has said this isn't about delay for its own sake. She said publicly that she understands the urgency people feel and that she's not taking time simply to take time. She's taking the time the investigation actually requires. Whether that reads as diligence or as a wall depends entirely on which side of the weight you're standing on. For Nolan's family, 4 weeks in, it has mostly felt like the second one. For now, what's left is a 5-hour gap in the GPS data that no one has fully explained. A location discrepancy a mother found on her own, using an app built to give parents peace of mind not to solve a case. A missing set of neck structures that could have answered the one question everyone actually wants answered. And a boy who made his family salmon for dinner the night before the 4th of July hugged his mother goodbye and told her he'd see her soon. A 5-hour gap the family didn't create and can't explain away. A discrepancy a mother found because she refused to simply wait for someone else to look. And a young man who is still, more than 3 weeks later, waiting on the truth his own family has been fighting this hard just to get close to. If you want to see justice for Nolan Wells, and you want to see cases like this covered honestly and fully, please subscribe to this channel.